evening and welcome back to Kirkstone. Well, we've just received a colossal box. It's one of the biggest boxes that we've ever received. It's like a Saturn V of boxes, and as per usual I'm somewhat mystified by the contents because it is so large, and I've been racking my brains to try and work out what on earth it could possibly be. So let us tarry no longer. Let us expedite proceedings with maximum efficiency and a modicum of joy, because this is a voyage, at the very least, of some discovery. I think I've opened it upside down, which is rather typical for me, but I'm sure it'll manage. Let me slide out the contents and see what we have. After that quick fly through, we have two objects of botanical interest, and this is where we shall start. And this shouldn't require too much identification. It's a group, we know what it is, it's a group of leaves, the dwarf Sansevieria Bonsell, and you can see just how thick those leaves are, and it's in a very small pot. So I shall be, what shall I do with this? Shall I split them into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plants? You know, I think I might. I'll split them into 7 plants on this one rather than keep them together. So 7 individual Bonsell miniature cylindrica relative Sansevierias. Nice and small, but destined ultimately to be individual plantlets. And then the other, which is quite interesting and exciting, I don't know, my friends, is a plant pot containing, whoa, look at that! But that is my first Dracæna, and this lovely label, and it is a very, very, very impressive label. I don't think I've ever had a label as impressive as that one. It's a Dracæna cultivar called Yellow Coast. Now I don't know how much of that you can see, and of course Dracænas are quite common and popular and well known to a lot of people, but not to me. And I only came really very interested in Dracæna once they became the coverall genus for Sansevieria. But that is a pretty spectacular plant. I mean, what's going to happen to this plant is possibly even more interesting, certainly to me, because what I'm planning on doing with this plant is using it for propagation. So I'm going to take a cut here. So if I have my scissors, which I'm not going to use right now because I'm going to use a sharp sterile knife, I'm going to make that cut right down there, and I'm going to make the other cut right down there, and I'm going to plant those 2 cuttings of Dracæna Yellow Coast and grow them on. And this trunk, this well-rooted trunk, I'm going to leave, because if you look at the trunk, there are places, for example here, where the next branch is going to be pushing through. So this trunk will actually create more plantlets, and so the cycle will continue. But right now, at least for a few weeks, I'm going to be admiring gorgeous foliage of this Dracæna, and then the next job here will be to divide and plant up these 7 individual little fatty Bonsells. So that, I'm going to invite you to join me on the next stage of this journey, because where it may be leading may be a surprise to you for those who have been following this series. But I will be with you very soon. What an amazing plant. Look at those shades, those different shadings of greens and yellows and creams. Dracaena Yellow Coast. Absolutely gorgeous. Okay, I'll be with you very soon. Bye for now. Good morning and welcome back to the Sansevieria series on Kirkstone. So we've been having quite a detailed look over the last year or so at the growing collection of Sansevierias here at Kirkstone. A little bit different this one because we're looking at some established plants that we have to do something with. So earlier on in the series, I think it was in fact very early in the series, on episode 1, we met for the first time this fantastic, fast growing now, it wasn't fast growing then, but fast growing now, Sansevieria bella, which we got from our normal supplier, Al Lyas, Sansevieria Al, Sans Al on eBay as he trades. And this plant has been flourishing. If you go back to episode 1, you will see exactly where it was, which was up to about there. So we started off, and we'll come back to this in a couple of seconds, we started off with the normal leaf-shaped leaves, and as the plant has matured, we've moved on more to the longer linear lanceolate leaves that we see on the older Sansevieria bella plants. Okay, now this plant has obviously become slightly loose because it's moving towards the kind of stilt-like roots that you see on Sansevieria pinguicula, and basically I don't want two plants in one pot, and the reason it's in this rather fey decorative pot is because this one has been in the house and somebody's wife has decided to not have plant pots because they're not very feminine. We'd rather have decorative pots, so it's not something I get involved with, but I really don't care. So let's get rid of the decorative pot, and there's a couple of things that we need to do. First of all is to rescue the grit. So this is the grit that we use in the topping, so we're going to pour the grit out. There's quite a lot of grit. And some sand. Okay, so having rescued as much grit as possible rather than waste it, we can then see exactly what we have, and what we have is a very happy pair of Sansevieria bella, which were originally one plant but have now become two. So I need the receptacle, and I'm going to pour all of the grit out of here. Now this is quite dry, and to be perfectly honest, very sandy. But I'm going to experiment slightly, and I'm going to increase the humus content from this to something which is a little bit more nutritious. I hope it will be okay. So I can get rid of this larger pot because these will both be going into slightly smaller pots. And there we are. There is the separation being made. Each plant has got a very, very well developed system, a root system. So I'm really not worried in any way whatsoever about what's happening here. Okay, so we're going to use a slightly stratified approach. I'm going to put this old soil, this old very gritty soil, which is about 75% grit or coarse sand. I'm going to put that one slightly away and come back to it. And then I'm going to take the pots that I'm using, which are, as I say, slightly smaller. So there's the old pot diameter, there's the new pot diameter. To show you the difference, I'll put the new pot inside the old pot. So it's about an inch less because there's only one plant and not two. And then I'm going to put some large pebbles in the bottom. And then I'm going to fill any gaps with a small amount of cat litter, which is still very free draining but will stop the pebbles from moving around. Okay, then I'm going to introduce a new potting mix, which is 50% clay-based loam, so quite a clayey, alluvial, loamy substrate, which is J. Arthur Bower's compost, and I've mixed that 50-50 with the Katsan cat litter, which is a fantastic pumice-based free draining material, which I really like. It's ultra hygienic, it's all about the same size, it's standardized, and I really like it. And I'm going to put that in the very bottom of the pot. Okay, and get rid of that bit which I don't need. And then I'm going to take a very small amount of bone meal fertilizer, and I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of bone meal fertilizer in the very bottom of the pot. Now, I have talked about this before on some of the Haworthia videos, and I've shown the results. It really draws the roots down. Okay, now I'm going to take my first plant and I'm going to see how it sits in the pot, and that is exactly where I want it to go. I hope you can see that. Let's move this other Sansevieria out of the way. Okay, I want it to sit like that because Sansevierias do not like to be in pots which are too big. There's a couple of reasons for that. One of them is the fact that when the pot is too big, you will tend to water more. And if you water more, A, it takes longer for the water to drain away out of the pot, or dry, or evaporate from the surface of the pot. And B, it means that the plant is sitting in wetter soil for longer, which means that it is harder for it to actually absorb the small amount of moisture it needs from the soil, and therefore the soil is, I'm repeating myself here slightly, draining slower. So basically, a bigger pot means wetter soil and a longer time for the plant to be sitting in damp soil. And none of these arid area plants like to be sitting in damp soil. So we've got the plant in the pot, we've got the very well established root ball, and we've got the plant in the middle of the pot more or less, which is where it needs to be. So the next job is simply to get a container with our 50-50 mix and then pour this mix into the plant pot. Now, it is obvious, hopefully, that all of these bits of particulate substrate, the compost, will not be going fully around the roots. So once the plant is stable, it's now stable, once the plant is stable and we even off the surface of the soil, what we do is we tap. And the reason we tap is to encourage those particles to go all the way around the roots. And then we've got excess compost that goes back in the bucket. Now you'll see why there was a tray and a pan. And that's the first one done. Okay, so I'll now leave that 1 day, maybe 3 days, 1 to 3 days, depending on the weather. If it's very warm, 1 day. If it's very cool and damp, as it is at present, 3 days. Just in case there has been any micro damage to the roots, let the roots heal and then resume the watering campaign. So the only part of the job which you haven't seen yet is to return the grit that we started with onto the top of the pot. So what have we achieved? What have we done in that exercise? So first of all, we had 2 plants where we had 1. Second of all, each plant has had its compost refreshed and some more nutrients added, not only from the new compost, but from the bone meal fertilizer. And the label goes back in just there. And that's number 1 done. Repotted, Sansevieria, nothing could be easier. And I've actually gone quite a bit slower than normal because of course I'm explaining things as I'm going along. And there we are. So we have 2 plants now, potted up and gritted. And I'll just do the traditional flying overview. So there's one lovely Sansevieria bella and a second lovely Sansevieria bella, and there we have 2 lovely fantastic Sansevieria bella from Sans. The only thing I wanted to say before I went is it's very interesting to see the evolution of the plant laid bare in its developmental morphology. So you can see those first early leaves are quite unremarkably leaf-like. They're flat and shaped like a leaf would be, and then they very gradually, as time goes on with each developing leaf, become longer and more cylindrical until you end up with these rather magnificent and needle sharp lengthy leaves which you would see on the mature form. So you can actually see the development, almost like an embryological exercise of the plant through its evolution, in the same way that if you see a human embryo, you can see for the first few days it looks like a fish, and in the second few days it becomes more like an amphibian, and then more reptilian, and then gradually mammalian. You can see human evolution in the development of the embryo, and you can see Sansevieria evolution in the development of the leaves. Is that interesting? Well, I think it is. There we are. 2 fantastic plants from Sansevieria Al, and more cultivation and propagation advice coming up right now. See you in a few minutes.